And this presentation today is an interesting one, and it's a personal one from the perspective that I'm trying to give everyone a little bit of insight into mistakes that people make both in their careers and also in relationships. And I think that one of the reasons I think this topic is so important is because a lot of times people will, go into relationships and make the same sort of mistakes over and over again, and they'll do the same things in their careers. And so a lot of the stuff that I talk about in a lot of my presentations in the past have always been about, how to get a job and so forth. And this is more about how to have a really good career and guidelines that I've noticed that people that they follow in their careers and lives tend to work the best for them. And in some respects, I was looking at this right before I started, and it's almost like a comedy. And the events that I'm talking about here took place well over 20 years ago. And so I don't think I'm offending anybody, certainly by talking about them at this point. And they all happened when I was young. But at the same time, I do feel, they're interesting, and the lessons that I gain from them are lessons that I think apply to everyone's careers, and giant mistakes that I see people making in their careers, and I've seen over and over again. So when I was in my first year of law school, I met someone I liked and in a bar, and ended up falling in love and connecting with a person in a very strong way. And for both of us, it seemed like we had everything that we ever wanted. I spent the most of my first year of law school with her, and then I spent the summer with her that summer, and then I lived with her, the following year. After we moved in together and I guess it would have been the beginning of my second year of law school, I went to a party, and I noticed that she seemed very interested in someone there, and I couldn't believe it because we'd been very close for several months, and I thought she might have been drunk. I didn't know what was going on, and we had an argument about it, and it was sort of an adolescent type thing. It happens, in your early 20s, I guess. And, but anyway, so by the winter of that year, the relationship was such that I realized she was actually involved with the same guy, and had been for a little bit of time, and it was a good, not a good relationship. So I ended up, moving out, and that was that. But then by the end of the school year, we were back together again, and moved back together in the summer, and had a great summer. But then, I decided to get engaged, after that summer. And on the night of my engagement, she told me she'd been involved with the same guy the entire year, including when we'd gotten back together. And I was upset, continued with the engagement. I was in my third year of law school then, and you might be wondering, of course, was I happily ever after? A few months into my third year after getting engaged, I realized she was with the same guy again. So she moved out, and then by the springtime, she was back. We ended up getting engaged again. We spent a year in Michigan while I was clerking together. And then the summer, right before my clerkship ended, actually, we were scheduled to be married in August. She took a trip with her family to the East Coast and met someone else who was married, and broke off the engagement. And then I moved to Los Angeles after the clerkship, and and that was kind of it or at least let me just go back here. Give me 1 second. This is all very funny, I think. Let me see here. Anyway, so after I moved to Los Angeles, she started traveling to Los Angeles on her own several times, and wanted to get back together. So we ended up getting back together, and then within a year, we planned another wedding, and scheduled getting married again. And a year or so later, we were married. It was kind of a weird wedding, because it was just didn't seem right. There was just something kind of off about it. I had a little bit too much to drink, probably because I was confused and conflicted, which was crazy. And then we were married. About 6 months into the marriage, she started spending a lot of time with a guy that she was working for. worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, one day I left for work, came home, you know, because I'd forgotten something, heard her talking on the phone and that she was involved with this guy. You know, she denied it. And a few months after this, I was at the office and a process server showed up and I was divorced. So this is just, you know, years and years of drama. You know, it's actually fairly funny, but I mean, it's just crazy looking back. A few weeks after this, she called me on the phone and begged me to take her back. You know, said life wasn't worth living without me. She didn't know what she was doing. You know, I called one of our family members, told them I was worried, and they told me she spent the weekend with the first guy from law school, and it hadn't worked out, and she was unhappy. So at that point, I moved on. You know, found someone else, and the whole thing, you know, ended. And you know, this is a mistake that I made for 7 years, over and over again. I made the same mistake, and I realized, you know, in retrospect, how crazy this all was, and it was crazy, you know, and it's crazy to think that someone would spend 7 years of their life going back and forth with someone, and making those sort of mistakes. But people do make mistakes. They make them in their personal life. They also make them in their careers. They make them. And those mistakes, can have major impacts into, the sorts of lives we lead, and and how happy we are. And if you understand, the mistakes you're making, and what kind of lessons that this particular thing offers, that I went through, it can be very, very happy for your helpful for your long-term happiness and success. And there's a lot of lessons here that I see even the most successful attorneys not leading, and making part of their life. So, I'm going to talk a lot about that today, and I hope you get a lot of benefit out of it. So one of the things the mistakes that a lot of people make in their careers, and they make them wherever they go. They make them in law firms, they make them in corporations, they make them in the government. But a lot of times people will get secure, stop improving, and take the employer or other person for granted. And once you stop improving, that's one of the riskiest things that can happen to you in your career and life, because once you stop improving, things kind of start going downhill, and you always need to be working on yourself and getting better and better. And it was funny, by the time my first wife and I got married, we both were so battered and didn't care so much about this relationship anymore. And we care, but we kind of didn't look good. We gained a lot of weight. We were just not really trying to make the other person happy, and neither of us were. And that's a sign that you're in, that something is not right. It's a sign in your relationships, but it's also a sign in your job. I mean, the best people, whether they're executives or attorneys or whoever, are constantly trying to improve and get better and better and better. And and the people that are the most successful partners, and the people that are the most successful associates and so forth, are always doing that. And it's extremely important. You can never think you're there, and you can never believe that you're as successful as you can be. And I was interviewing someone the other day that had been in-house with a company for 20 years, and was talking to him about this type of work. And it was a very accomplished person, and he was interested in this business. And I was saying to him that this isn't something where you can sit down and you're constantly doing it. I mean, you're constantly with placement, for example, you constantly have to be pushed, and you constantly have to improve, and you have to find new opportunities for people and go out and meet new people, law firms, to bring in clients, and you have to be on people, and there's just so much room for improvement. And I keep a list of hundreds of things I need to do to improve and BCG attorney search, for example, and these sort of presentations and everything that I do. And that's something that the best attorneys do. The most successful attorneys out there, they keep huge books of things that are relevant to what they're doing. Like, they'll keep all the clippings of, cases that they think are interesting, or, and contacts, and they're constantly doing whatever they can to get better, and they never think that they've arrived anywhere. People that kind of coast on their degrees, or they coast on the type of firm that they're at, and they think that they're successful because of that, are not. I mean, you have to constantly keep improving. You need to improve yourself and really, everything you do. And, so in this marriage, as the marriage, which was a very short marriage, but, I stopped taking her out as much. I stopped doing things that I normally would do, like putting the dishes away all the time, and she stopped doing things for me, like I said. And pretty soon, she stopped even letting me know what time she'd be home. And, so we stopped we took each other for granted. There was on both sides, there was this kind of thing where, I'll accept you, you accept me, therefore we don't have to try, which is not good. I mean, an employer that's not pushing you to constantly get better is not good. A relationship that you're not pushing yourself to improve in is not good. And, you need to improve, in your job constantly, because if you're not improving in your job, then something is wrong. I mean, you should constantly be improving. And the best law firms will, constantly, like, they'll always be evaluating people and setting targets and making sure that you're improving and getting better. And they do that with their partners, and they do that with their associates. But if their associates aren't making it right after a while, they don't really bother. They're like, okay, this person's not trying. So you can never get secure in a job, and you can never take the other person for granted. And you should always push yourself to do as well as you can. And that also means, in terms of looking for jobs, when you're looking for jobs, the best careers are people that, they may start out at a smaller firm and then move to a bigger firm and a bigger and bigger and bigger, because they keep improving. And employers like to see that. Employers want to see people that are constantly improving and trying to get better. They want to see people, that are, doing everything that they can to get better. And that's very attractive. That's one of the most important things of a job search or a career that advances, is the person that is always trying to get better and always improving and talking with enthusiasm about whatever they do. So, in many employment situations, I've seen lots of people take their jobs for granted. I see it, people that work with me. I see it with people that, work in law firms. I've seen it with the people, all sorts of attorneys. They do things like, they'll stop coming in on time, or they'll come to work later. They'll not do all their assignments. They'll, if they're supposed to turn in reports each week, they'll stop turning in reports. Or if they're supposed to do it, each day, they won't do it each day. And the problem is when an employer sees you're taking them for granted, they get resentful. And when they see this, I had an experience once that was kind of interesting. It was, I was talking to a guy that was running a telephone answering service, and it was the recession of maybe 2002. It was one of the first, recessions. And I said, wow, with this recession, your business must actually be going down. And he said, no, it's going up. And I said, why is it going up? And he said, well, because, people will walk out in their, reception area, and they'll see their receptionist filing their nails or whatever, and not working hard and getting anything done. And they'll think this is just a waste of money, so they'll hire me. And I thought that was interesting, because he was saying that during a recession, the people, that he felt, the employees that felt like they were being taken for the employer, for the employers, he felt that the employees, he felt were taking them for granted, were, losing their jobs. And employers want to have people around that don't take them for granted and appreciate them and the work, and will work hard. They want people that, want their jobs and appreciate their jobs. And they want people motivated to improve and get better and better at their jobs. And that alone is one of the most important lessons you can ever learn, because most people are not trying to improve. Most people are just, coasting. And when you start coasting, you're not doing yourself any favors, because you're not advancing, and you're going to stay where you're at, and you're not going to improve. I mean, a lot of people, for example, don't like working for the government, because the government will pay you. It's very simple. There's not a lot of motivation sometimes to improve, and legal jobs in the government, it's certainly not simple, but a lot of government jobs can be like that, especially in military branches. and you want to get better and better and better at your job. It's very, very important. So in relationships, it's sort of the same thing. I mean, you always want to, and this isn't a relationship, presentation, but it's related to relationships in the sense that, your job is. I mean, you want to always make your relationship stronger and create a better bond. And you shouldn't assume you can treat another person poorly and not to pay attention to them without consequences. And you need to constantly value your partner and your friends and other people. And you can't do the same, thing with a job. I mean, you can't take a job for granted. It's a very, important lesson, and something, you need to understand, because the second you stop taking something for granted is the second you're when you check out, that's when you start losing your job, and that's when you start having problems. And people lay people off and let people go that take, their jobs for granted, and they advance people and they keep people that don't. So, in terms of my ex-wife, I'm not, sure why, she enjoyed having other people notice her and make her feel attractive. But, I'm sure it had a lot to do with the fact that I was taking her for granted. And, and so she wanted to be with someone that, made her feel good about herself. And so I'm certainly, to blame for, even though a lot of her behavior may look horrible, a lot of it in no relationship, just like no job, a lot of times, there's 50-50 to blame, but you just can't expect, you can't take anyone for granted for an extended period of time and expect to have a fulfilling relationship. And employers also shouldn't take you for granted, but you should also not take employers for granted. So, in almost every bad relationship I've seen, I mean, I've been in, it's ended or run in trouble because one person, took the other person for granted. We didn't spend time together. We assumed maybe the other person would tolerate our lack of attention. We didn't do things to make the relationship stronger. And because of that, things went south. And the truth is that everyone is valuable and, and has valuable characteristics that make them useful. And every job has value. I mean, there's going to be redeeming characteristics in almost every job. And so, you just need to realize that no one needs to be taken for granted. And there's always going to be people out there for relationship purposes that won't take you for granted. So, if you're in a bad relationship, for example, you may, realize you should understand that you're probably someone's dream mate, and vice versa. And you can be with someone you won't take for granted, and vice versa. So you need to, kind of understand that. But the same thing kind of goes with legal jobs. There's all these people that are kind of clawing away, and I see it in my job because I'm looking at, hundreds of resumes a day. There's all these people that are clawing away, trying to get better legal jobs and trying to do, much better. And a lot of people dream of having the exact same sort of legal career that you have, or have had in the past, and would like nothing more to have what you want. And if they're hired, they're not going to take the job for granted, and they're going to give it, everything that they have. And one thing that I've always noticed is, if you come out of like a really good law school, or you do really well wherever you went to law school, and you get a really good legal job, the person that's going to follow you in most cases when you leave, if you leave after a couple of years or you leave after 4 or 5 years, is going to be a person that probably is not as good of a firm that you're at, but is going to be hungry, for the type of opportunity that you've left. And it could be even if regardless of the firm you're at, a lot of times, because employers are always trying to bring in people that aren't taking the job for granted, that are enthusiastic and have a lot of drive and want to do very well there, and are excited about the job and will give it everything that they have. And it's very important. And that's something they're looking for. That's one reason why, a lot of times you can get into, a better employer than you're working at if you have that enthusiasm and they believe that you won't take it for granted. Because a lot of times the employer will have all these people around them that have taken the job for granted, and they want those people out, and they want to bring fresh blood in. I mean, that's part of the reason that there's probably, a little bit of, age discrimination in certain employers, because they want people that are not going to take them for granted and are excited about it and are constantly improving. So most employers, by the way, can find people for any job that they have. And in order to do that, they need to have, get rid of existing people. And the people that they want to keep around are the people that are trying to improve constantly, that aren't taking the job for granted, and are developing. And just everything that they do, they're getting better at. Whether if they're a litigator, they're becoming more effective in their depositions, and their writing's getting tighter and better, and they're coming up with better arguments, and they're surrounding themselves and bringing in new cases, and writing articles and giving talks and doing things that other people aren't, because they're not taking the job for granted. And the most secure people who value themselves the most are only going to keep people around that don't take them for granted. So the larger the law firm, typically the more ways that they have to determine if you're taking them for granted or not. They'll look at your hours, they'll look at your business, they'll look at your outside activities, they'll look at how you're getting along with people and your attitude. They're going to look at all these things, and a lot of it is made to make sure that people that are taking them for granted are not there, and the people that aren't are kind of putting this pressure on the organization to make it better. And organizations that survive, have that built in. And if they don't have that built in, then there's always, a lot of times going to be problems, and it's going to be kind of an organization where it's not going to grow and get better and better. I mean, I've seen, like, for example, like a lot of law firms, that are just really, hungry, and they're able to kind of maintain that by just churning people constantly, and until they get this kind of quality of people in this culture where everything is very, very effective. So it's also a two-way street, though. And it's important to understand that, employers, will a lot of times, often, take the people that work there for granted. And it's especially true with, very high paying legal employers. I mean, they believe that because they're paying you a lot of money, they can give you as much work as they want. They can, treat you poorly. They can, your job is, you're not, they can always replace you, and that sort of thing. And, so, it's important, to understand that it's not just you taking the employer for granted, it's employers taking you for granted. And, if you're taken for granted though long enough, and you realize that there's no advantage to being treated that way, you're likely to abandon the employment relationship. And one thing that I've noticed is attorneys that go to a lot of times very large law firms will, feel very, sad. I mean, and kind of, disillusioned with the idea of working in a law firm. They just don't want to do it because they feel so taken for granted, so abused, and they don't feel like, there's any room for them to succeed and be themselves. And, and that's not good. So you need to make sure, that you realize that you can always go to places that won't take you for granted, and that's important as well. So, but the thing is that, in any position, you really can never get secure. And, it doesn't matter if you're going to work at a law firm or an employer that's may not have the same caliber of people as you. It doesn't matter, wherever you are, because the second you start taking an employer for granted, you run into problems. You can't, just expect to get a paycheck from a law firm forever. You're going to need to bring in business at some point, and you're going to need to bill in a lot of hours. And, you can't just expect to, coast and not produce the best legal work you can. You need to constantly be improving, and you need to constantly go look for work. You can't just go sit down someplace and say, hey, I'm here ready for work. You have to actually go out and make, network inside of a law firm and form relationships, and in order to improve your legal skills, because those people are going to give you work. You need to search it out. And just because you want to work doesn't mean you're going to get work. And do your best. And you need to constantly question how you can do better and improve. You need to be, looking at every aspect of your performance, and, what are you doing right? What are you doing wrong? And you need to seek out advice. You need to be aware of your weaknesses and work on them. And you need to reinforce your strengths. The things you're good at, you need to get more of and do well at. And, and you need to constantly question, what are you doing wrong, and what could you do better? And work on those things, because that's how, people become successful. They don't become successful by not setting goals. They become successful by, constantly looking at what can you do to improve. And the most valuable time you probably spend each week, would be, writing down what are your long-term goals, and then reviewing those goals each week. And then what are your goals for that week and that month, and creating goals. I mean, and I'll do a goal setting session soon in this, but understanding your goals and what they are, and constantly questioning what you can do to be better and better is going to make you, really much better at your job. So one of the things is that I think is really interesting is there was someone that worked for us and for about I don't know 18 years, and before she worked for me for 18 years, she worked at her previous company for a law firm for 18 years, or for 20 years. And one of the things that she did that was very cool, I thought, is every 6 months we kind of had a review together, and we talked about how she was doing and what her progress was. And but unlike other people, she would just, I'd tell her how she was doing, I thought, but she'd always demand more critiques, more, things that she wanted to know about that she was doing wrong. And then she'd bring up things she could do better. And I think that one of the keys to people like staying in organizations for the long term and doing well is, constantly questioning yourself and having that, internally and coming up with reasons, that you should be doing better, and finding stuff. And that's also that way with attorneys and law firms. The ones that do the best over the long term are constantly questioning their performance and what they can do. They're aware of their weaknesses. They work on their weaknesses, and then they reinforce their strengths, and they just keep getting better and better and better. It's pretty amazing, actually, when I look at the people and how well they do. So, I mean, the lesson here is, you can never really take your job for granted. You can never take, access to work for granted. You need to constantly be looking for work, and, and bring, within your firm and your employer. And then you also need to constantly be, looking for work outside your employer. And, and all these things. I mean, you just can never take anything for granted. So, that whole attitude of not taking things for granted, being appreciative of what you have, and thankful for what you have is important. And another thing that I've noticed, of the best attorneys is, they're thankful. They're thankful for their clients giving them work. They're thankful for their firm. They say thank you. And because of that, people like them, and they give them more things, and they keep them around. So, it's a very powerful lesson, and it's one, I hope you take. So the next lesson is, committing to an employer or a person. And this is very, very important, because a lot of times people will never, they may be there, but they're kind of always, one foot out the door. And, one of the things that people that have a history of kind of bad relationships, and there are people out there that, have been, divorced multiple times, or are never, able to settle down with anyone. A lot of times what's going on in the background is they're not able to commit. They think that they can do better, or they don't want to commit or be held down. And it's the same thing goes, in troubled legal careers. Most of the troubled legal careers that I see are, people that have issues committing, and sometimes people never commit. And when I look at resumes, and I look at, hundreds of them per day, in most instances, I don't really pay much attention to where the person went to law school, for example. That is less important than, either upward mobility or showing an ability to commit to an employer. And it's, it's very important if you have the ability to commit to an employer. Also a practice area in what you're doing. And, there's really no reason to commit to an employer, if you're, you know, going to be undervalued, held back, and you're constantly going to be unhappy. And there's no, you know, reason to, you know, commit to a person, you know, where you're undervalued, held back, and unhappy. You know, but at the same time, to make things work, you know, in a relationship or with an employer, you do need to commit. And very few people come across as committing. And a lot of times, you know, legal employers don't like it because they feel, you know, that people won't commit, and because they feel they won't commit, they don't give them the training or the mentorship that they would otherwise get. They feel taken for granted, and that sort of thing. And you know, I was just thinking, it was kind of I don't know how relevant it is, but it was kind of an interesting story. I remember when I was a summer associate in a law firm, you know, they would take us out to dinner, and, you know, you could kind of order whatever you wanted. And there was always, like, you know, a couple people that would do things like order the lobster or the most expensive things on the menu. And those are the people that didn't get offers in the summer. And I feel like the employers felt like they took them for granted, you know, and so they felt like this is just going to be, you know, a troubling person. And I think anytime, you know, an employer thinks that you're taking them for granted, or you'll, you know, then they're not going to like that. And that was just kind of an idea that just kind of occurred to me. But one of the things is, you know, a lot of people will never commit to an employer, a practice area, or even a practice setting. And it's very easy to distract that person and get them to leave. You know, they may see lots of, you know, things that I call bright, shiny objects in their environment that look better than where they're at. They believe that sometimes a different firm would be better. Maybe working in-house as opposed to a law firm. You know, maybe working in a big market or a small market as opposed to the market that they're in. You know, is all for the taking. You know, if the person would only move firms or do something different. And so people, like, are kind of motivated by moving because there's something sometimes inside of them that some feeling that they need to appease, or something, you know, to make them feel better. But the problem is if, you know, unless you commit somewhere, you're never going to know, you know, really what you're capable of. And in reality, most legal jobs and especially in law firms, are very similar. They have the same sets of rules. Some of them have access to bigger clients and, you know, better reputations and so forth, but they're all very similar. And, you know, so you need to, you know, do whatever you can, you know, to commit most times, if, you know, if you're capable of it. You know, but the failure, when you think about it, you know, to commit is very important, because, you know, if you don't know what you want and you're constantly confused, it's just going to, you know, create lots of problems. And, you know, back to this, you know, disastrous on and off relationship with, you know, my ex-wife. You know, we actually had a very good relationship when we were together. I mean, when we were together, you know, just the two of us, we had a lot of fun. We were supportive. You know, we rarely fought. You know, and she wanted to be, you know, a very good girlfriend and later a wife. And we did have a good relationship. But, you know, inside of her, just like inside of a lot of people, you know, working in, you know, law firms and other, you know, legal environments, there was something that was making her, you know, kind of drift away, just in something that was, you know, more important to her, you know, than whatever that we had, or just would constantly, you know, eat at her. And it's not, you know, it's certainly my fault too, that what happened, but it's also, you know, things that kind of motivated her. And, you know, and what, you know, she'd grown up sort of poor, but not wealthy, and was able to be sidetracked by, you know, people that had a lot of, you know, certainly were, you know, very wealthy, and could provide her, you know, a certain type of status or introductions and things that I couldn't. And, you know, so it was something I couldn't control, and it was something that was important to her at the time. And, you know, and that's just, you know, people have different priorities, and it's certainly like that with jobs as well. You know, and, but the thing is because of her lack of commitment, And I saw that. I was never fully happy with her. I knew that there was something that was motivating her that wasn't related to me, and I was angry about it. You know, and it made her held back to some extent in her relationship. And I also knew I couldn't trust her. And, you know, and I took all sorts of actions to protect myself financially and otherwise that I might otherwise have taken. And there's a thing kind of with employers, and it's interesting. If you worked at too many different places and you go into a new employer, it's going to be very hard for that employer ever to fully trust you. And that lack of trust is not going to help you. It's going to actually hurt you because you're never going to kind of be involved in the inner circle and seen as someone that's likely to stay around. You're seen more as just kind of an employer, you know, employee. And I've seen that even when I've hired people. If someone, you know, has been at multiple employers and I've hired them, I mean, it's very difficult to trust that person because you just don't know, you know, what's going to happen with them and whether or not they're going to stick around. And in most cases, they don't. So, you know, if you want to become a partner in a law firm, or you want to, you know, get a position, a better position, if the employer doesn't believe that they can trust you and they think you're going to leave, then, you know, it's going to be, you know, very difficult for you to advance many times or to get access to the same sorts of work. And because people want to see people that are there and that they trust and are really part of the fabric of the group. And it's important. I mean, people are tribal animals, and you know, it's just it's harder for outsiders to get in if someone has been there for a long time. You know, and there's reasons, of course, for not committing to an employer. I mean, the job could be a dead end. There could be no way to advance. You could be unhappy, and you know, for reasons related to the employer, and treated poorly. The work could not be, you know, the type of work you're capable of doing. You could be capable of getting better work. You could be capable of, you know, a lot more, you know, responsibility. And so, I mean, I work with people and help them move jobs for lots of reasons. And I mean, there's definitely good reasons for moving jobs, lots of them. But the thing is, you know, very few people ever commit to a single legal employer. A lot of them won't commit to a practice setting, and others won't even commit to a practice area. And when you have a lot of different jobs, you know, with doing different things, you know, it's going to be very difficult for you to advance professionally. The people that I place are almost always people that are committed to one thing. I mean, they do one practice area and they've committed to it. And so, you know, even if they've been at 3 different firms in 6 years, you know, they have that commitment. There's something that's a good commitment on their resume that people can see that's important, and they've committed to working in a law firm and not, you know, so that level of commitment to a practice setting, a level of commitment to a practice area, and even geographic commitment, all, you know, is very, very important. And if there's any type, the more that stuff vacillates, the harder it's going to be for you to have a good legal career. So it's very important to understand. You know, so think of the pain that comes to everybody, you know, when you don't commit. And just in terms of a relationship, you know, I spent, I don't know, 7 or 8 years of my life with someone who wasn't committed, and, you know, and constantly was on pins and needles, and, you know, just never felt stable, and lots of emotional energy on my end and her end. I mean, there was just, you know, without commitment, you have nothing. And but employers deal with this all the time. Like I said, I mean, they don't know who they can trust. You know, they have to continuously be looking for new people because even if they think someone's going to stay, they know they're going to leave. You know, they're constantly getting new people up to speed, and then those people leave, and it costs them money, and it costs the clients a lot of money because someone else needs to learn the clients matter, and it costs them money. And then if someone isn't committed, they're not going to be giving it their all. They're going to be, you know, kind of coasting and not, you know, working a lot of times as much as they say they are, as much as they could. And they'll, you know, be talking kind of, you know, they won't be cheerleaders for the organization. You know, so, you know, it's all very important, and it hurts the employer, and it hurts you in relationships. It hurts the other party in relationships when you're not committed. Everybody, there's so much pain in the world that comes and cost to employers and cost to, our mental health and so forth when people don't commit. So being able to commit to a practice area, being able to commit to a location, being able to commit to a single employer, being able to commit to a practice setting and know you want that is going to make a huge difference in your long-term success, having people protect you in your employer, wherever you work. And if you back that up, with not taking things for granted, I mean, you'll be in very good shape. It's really one of the most essential things when you're applying to new positions. I mean, employers want to see commitment. Ideally, you would be at one employer in one practice setting, doing one type of thing, and those are the most marketable people. And the more you show a vacillating commitment in any of those things, the less likely you are to be marketable. So employers, if people that go in-house from a law firm, have a difficult time, sometimes impossible, going back to a law firm. People that are doing multiple different things inside of a law firm tend to have a difficult time getting a job in a law firm. I saw this resume the other day of this guy that was laid off, and it was very confusing. He was at a major firm, a very good firm, but he only had 1 year of experience, but he did this kind of weird practice area location. So for 3 months, he did environmental law. And then for another 3 months, he did corporate. And then for another 3 months, he did tax. And for another 3 months, he did real estate or something. So I've got this resume, this guy that's done all these different things. He's only 1 year out of law school. And I'm thinking to myself, well, it doesn't matter that, he went to this great law school. It doesn't matter that he worked at this great law firm. His resume doesn't show anything. And, there's no commitment to any practice here. So he's very, very difficult to market. It would be better if he'd just done corporate or he'd done one thing, but he hadn't. So, you have to commit to a practice area. You have to commit to, in most cases, you have to commit to a geographic location. If I'm working with someone, say in Michigan, and they've worked in Michigan for 10 years and they've decided that they'd love to go to California, Arizona, Florida, Connecticut, Maine, and North Carolina. Well, their odds of getting a position in any of those areas other than Michigan are very, very slim. And in fact, if the person is in Detroit, their odds of getting a position in another part of Michigan are very slim. Because if they have no connection to those other areas, but if they show their commitment to Detroit, then people are going to want to hire them. So you have to show commitment on your resume, and you have to show commitment to a practice area, you have to show it to a region, and you have to show it to, a practice setting. Okay, so your resume typically will show your commitment, and that's, when I look at resumes all day, I look at commitment. And, the best way to describe someone trying to do a bunch of practice areas, like that guy whose resume I described, would be trying to describe someone, trying to date multiple people at the same time. They never develop any type of solid foundation with anyone, and they're just kind of dabbling. And they're dabbling with multiple relationships. They're dabbling with multiple people. There's never the opportunity for a serious connection with anyone. There's always a distance, and it doesn't work in relationships, and it also doesn't work in the practice of law. I mean, you can't be dabbling. You have to be, committed to something. And if you're not committed, the people that are committed are getting better and better and better, and they're more and more focused, and they're continually, learning about what they do, and much better. I mean, the difference between myself doing my job in terms of placement 20 years ago and today is insane. I mean, it's like I'm warp speed, ahead of where I was, and I have more resources, and I know more about the market, and I know different types of attorneys, and I'm more enthusiastic because I'm more invested and I'm more committed. And I was committed, 20 years ago, but I'm saying the level of commitment is great, so, and it makes a huge difference. And, resumes of people, that, who try to, who like what they are doing, and are focused in a practice area, get jobs. And ones that don't, are trying to do lots of different things, do not get attention. I mean, employers just avoid them. They can't, if someone can't settle down in terms of a practice area and what they're doing, or someone can't settle down in terms of an employer, then they're not going to hire them. And so, when I look at resumes, and the most important thing, you can go to resume workshops all you want, you can hire resume professionals. You can do whatever you want with your resume, but the most important thing in your resume is going to be to show that some sort of commitment to something. So for example, if you've done, environmental litigation and, commercial litigation and labor and employment litigation, and then you have all these different types of litigation on your resume, and then maybe you've done a little bit of IP work, people like to list all this sort of thing on their resume, but, and you've worked at 3 or 4 different employers, the resume that's likely to get hired is going to be someone is if you take all that information and you say, at the first employer I did mainly environmental work, and the second one I did mainly environmental work, and the third one I did mainly environmental work, and you don't have to put that you did some IP and other types of stuff. You just put, or you just say I did commercial litigation. That's all you need to say. Because if you start putting all this other stuff in there, it's unfocused. It makes you look unfocused. It doesn't help most of the time. And it certainly, depends on the market, and, smaller markets, having more experience in different things can be helpful, and actually, because that's how law firms work in smaller markets. But at the same time, being focused and committed to a practice area is really important. I've seen, just this week, we placed an insurance, like an attorney practicing lemon law, who'd been doing it for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. And you would think lemon law, which is suing car makers, when someone wants to return their car for being a lemon, meaning that multiple problems with it, so it needs to return. I've seen attorneys, get positions, and I place someone that's making over $200,000 a year because they're focused. And, this is not, representing, General Electric in an antitrust suit or something. It's, these are, small little cases, but because the person's focused, they make a lot of money and they do well. And they have lots of people willing to hire them. The same thing goes with insurance defense, project finance, even personal injury. In almost every case when I place someone and I see people get jobs, if someone's insurance defense, they just do insurance defense. And preferably in insurance defense, they're focused on one thing, or lemon law or project finance, they do one type of project finance. So the more you focus on one thing, the more marketable you're going to be. And your resume shows that, and that helps. The focused resume, when you have that, it doesn't matter where you went to law school. I think the lemon law attorney might not even have gone to a law school where, you could practice outside of California. I don't think it was an accredited law school. It doesn't matter. However you did there, it doesn't matter how you did in law school. But if you're very focused, you're going to be marketable. And, in contrast, a lot of attorneys, may not go to the best law schools. They may not have, they may be trying to do a wide variety of things and they can't settle down, and that hurts them. When I review like the backgrounds of, candidates in my firm that I've placed, or, that, our company's placed, it almost always shows a commitment to a single practice area. And, you need to look like you're doing one thing, and that's just how the legal community works. When your experience is focused, employers see, your background, and they're confident that, the work you're doing is something that you're committed to, and they like that. It's very important to them. But like I said earlier, a lot of times attorneys think that the more experience they get is the better. So they believe it's good to have litigation and corporate experience. So they think that if they've done patent work, they should include this on their tax resume because something about that's going to jump out at the employer. And they believe that the more experience they get, the more marketable they are. And that, that's not the case. It's just not true. Most employers, but not all, want someone who's committed to doing, one thing. And just that consistent commitment shows that, you want to do what you're doing. You're not going to change course. You're an expert. You've been getting better and better over time. And you know what you want. And it's true. Someone that does one thing, like I do one thing, gets better and better and better. And when you get better and better and better, everything you touch doing that, turns to gold. I mean, I can make placements in, the worst recessions. I can make them in great markets. But every time I look at someone's resume and I work with someone, I can be effective because I know, what to do because I've done it so many times and I've learned so many lessons. And, it's very important. So if you're an employer, I mean, would you want to hire someone that didn't know what they wanted to do, or would you want to hire someone that did? So you just can't be all things to all people. So your practice setting is another way you show you're committed or not. Like I said earlier, I mean, once an attorney leaves a law firm, they go in-house. Most law firms won't hire them again. They know that they're not necessarily committed to that practice setting, kind of the rules. If you don't commit to a practice setting, employers won't take a chance in you in the future. If you do want to go to work with the government, you should go to work with the government. If you want to work with a law firm, you should work in a law firm. If you want to work in the public interest, you should do that. If you want to be a professor, you should do that. I mean, for example, in placement, like I've always concentrated on law firm placement. It's just, the rules of making placements in law firms are much different than making them in companies. So, why would I do something where I would just dilute my effectiveness with law firms, and because I'm constantly learning and getting better when, and go in another direction. So when attorneys don't commit, people in other settings aren't impressed because they know, the attorney's unlikely to commit when they come back to a different practice setting. And there's just not a lot of incentive to hire you if you don't look committed to a certain practice setting. One of the things I notice constantly, and I see these resumes, several times a week, is of graduates of Yale Law School. They'll come out and they'll do all these things. They'll work in, for Congress, doing some sort of, internship. They'll get put on the committees. They'll maybe work in a law firm for a year, and then they'll go to work in a law school, and then, then they want to come back to a law firm with no experience really. And, and law firms always say no. I mean, they're like, no, it's just that it doesn't work that way. It's, they believe that someone that's not committed to whatever they're doing is toxic. And think about it. If someone has all these other interests, like working in a law school, working for Congress, doing, in the government, and then, doing all these things, or working for some nonprofit organization and, some third world country, and then law firms aren't impressed by that. I mean, just because you did very well in the classics, when you were in college, and and then got into a great law school with your grades and LSATs and everything, it doesn't make you committed to working in a law firm. And the most important thing for them running the law firm is having people there that are doing the work. I mean, every job, by the way, requires work. I mean, if you want to be very good and effective at something, you're going to have to put your head down and work hard. It's just, that's how it is. There's no free rides. I mean, sometimes there's free rides when you can get into organizations that don't have a lot of oversight and that are getting, outside money, and maybe like the government. But for the most part, if you want to make a good living and you want to do stuff that's important, and constantly improve, you're going to need to, work hard. It's just, that's the rule. It's everybody that's successful almost always works very, very hard. So in my situation, any reasonable person that was in my, in my position after a few years of someone coming and going and these different relationships, would have realized that her lack of commitment to me was toxic. It might not have been toxic to someone else, but if someone were reviewing her background, thinking about committing to her versus someone else, they would have to realize that she was toxic and unlikely to commit. On my side, they might have realized that I was a sucker, but that's another story. But the employers are like this. They realize that if someone is kind of vacillating between different practice settings, and they see they weren't committed in the past, they're going to be unlikely to commit to you again. And it's how it works. I mean, it's just, people are like that. Like the woman that worked for me for 20 years or 18 years, and her previous employer 18 years, worked for me for 18 years, her previous employer 20 years, had that kind of commitment. I mean, it's just, and it makes it work. And if people, there's certain people that commit and others that don't. So, many attorneys, they start their careers in law firms and then they have a dream of going in-house, often as soon as possible. That's something, at BCG, for example, we make people fill out questionnaires and then we ask them what their long-term goals are. And a lot of times, very often, the people that are working in law firms, the long-term goal is going to be to go in-house. And the problem is if you want to be somewhere else, and your long-term goal is to do something else and be somewhere else, you're never going to be fully invested in what you're doing. You're always going to be ready, for another opportunity, and you're never going to be really seeing all the opportunities that are there where you're at, and you're just wasting your time. You're not going to try to impress people as much. You're not going to do your best, and you're not going to get the best training because people aren't going to invest in you as much. And you're never going to do as well, as you ultimately could. And by the way, I mean, most people that are become general counsels and so forth of good sized companies that go in-house are partners in law firms first. I mean, if you were a large company, who would you hire? Would you want to make your general counsel someone that had worked for 3 or 4 years or 2 years inside of a law firm? Or would you want to hire someone that, committed and worked hard and rose up to become a general counsel, and then was recruited away at some point when maybe it looked like a good opportunity. Okay, so the best jobs in legal departments, like I said, are people that have demonstrated commitment, becoming partners. So if you commit to your practice setting and you're in a law firm or wherever you're working, you're going to do much better than if you didn't. Okay, so the final thing, and then we'll move on after this section, is just your ability to stay with a single employer shows your commitment. It shows something about your ability to do good work. It shows your ability to, stay with people for the long run. It shows your ability to, stay out of politics or get on the right side of politics. It shows your ability not to quit at the first sign of resistance. It shows your ability to deal with multiple different types of managers. It shows that you're, you get along with people. And, my wife was an example of someone that couldn't commit. And I'm certainly not saying I'm perfect. I mean, there were, like I said, every relationship, both parties, some are 80% at fault, some are 20% at fault. But in general, both sides are to blame when things don't work out. And there's certainly a lot of things I could have done better. But I do know, that after, in the span of a few years, she, had at least 7 or 8 serious relationships after leaving me. So, maybe there was something in her that couldn't commit. And it's like that with attorneys as well. And I'm, a lot of attorneys, can't commit. And, so, a lot of times people will, switch positions, every year or 2, and they'll do it for more than a decade. And, the risk of being an employer on the receiving end of that is just not good, because you'll bring someone in, you'll invest in that person, and then fairly soon the person will start thinking about leaving, and then they will leave. And when they're leaving, the work won't get done as well. They'll upset clients. There'll be issues with morale, and people wondering why people are leaving, and just other types of issues. So would you want to be an employer? Would you want to be at someone? If someone had been at 5 or 6 firms in 10 years, would you want to be the 7th person or the 6th person who hired them? I certainly wouldn't. So the idea is there's people out there that make situations work, and there's others that don't. And you want to be the kind of person that can last in an organization and commit. And and like I said, I mean, anytime I've hired someone that's been with their previous employer a decade or more, they've almost always stayed the same length of time with me. And if I had someone, who was a year or 2 with the last couple of employers, they always stay the same length of time with me as well. That's just a lot of times how people are wired. They're wired like that for employers, and then they're wired like that for jobs and relationships. I mean, and, and the best predictor of your future success is really going to be how often you move, and whether you're attracted to bright, shiny objects, and, but lack of, moving so much, a lot of times shows there may be issues with your work product to other employers, or it may show there's issues with your self-esteem. I mean, I know someone that's worked at so many firms, and this particular person, I would say has other things going on, but I think that every time he moves, he gets kind of a little bit of a boost to his self-esteem. Like, there, I'm still, attractive to other people, or people still like me. And so it's taking care of something that's kind of, deeply ingrained and problematical for him. And I don't know that, that involving an employer in that, in your self-esteem is really that important. It should be about something else. I was speaking with a woman the other day who had at least 7 jobs in 10 years. It was an amazing resume, and the woman had, very good experience along the way, but never for very long, for like an hour. And, I was asking about this. I was like, how would anybody reasonably, hire you? And she started bragging that she'd been headhunted away from each position, and there were a reason for all her moves. And, and the idea when she said she was headhunted away was that she was proud of that, and very proud that someone kind of wanted her and found her, an attractive employee. And I was thinking to myself, well, maybe she's, needs that, needs this, constant reassurance from the market. And, there is an excitement in taking a new job and interviewing and have your worth affirmed, and then going somewhere with a fresh slate. But, it's just not necessarily a good thing. And, because if you can't commit, no one's reasonably going to hire you, because, you're going to leave again. And they know that. And, so my point is with this commitment stuff is, you need to, if you've been leaving firms, or you're going someplace and you're thinking about leaving, sometimes you need to look at yourself and ask yourself why you're doing these things. I mean, I've done lots of things in my life, like, for example, being on the receiving end of this bad relationship, that had issues to do with me. And I'll talk about those in a little bit, but those were, my problems. And it's certainly not something, that I'm proud of, but it's things that I've worked on. And you need to work on that. If you're not thinking about committing, or you haven't, you need to think, how can I go someplace and settle down? What is it about me that's making me not settle down? And the problem with leaving positions is, there's always a period, of several months to a long time where, when you're thinking about leaving, or you're looking for a job, you're not fully applying yourselves really, and you're not serving the employer or the clients well. If you're leaving every year or two, that means you've spent a substantial amount of time, thinking about looking for a job and not committing, and that's just not a good idea. So, I've noticed also that a lot of times people that work in smaller markets don't move employers very often. And they start their firm, when they graduated from law school in a certain market, and then they spend a lot of times the remainder of their firm there. And, I think that, when there are not a lot of options in your environment, and settling down, it may seem like a good thing to you. People just do this, and it's not always, sometimes it's not the case of, it may be the case of people that go to very competitive environments, have, maybe are more ambitious and want to switch firms and stuff in markets. But I think people in, smaller markets are, tend to commit. And this is a kind of anecdotal evidence, but I've also noticed that people who live in smaller towns and smaller markets are much more likely to stay married and together than people that, live in large markets, or, and I think that there's kind of this thing out there with jobs and maybe relationships where there's all these bright, shiny objects. The larger the market, the more impersonal the relationships, and the more bright, shiny objects there are, and people will, be attracted to those. So another reason, and the thing that people, kind of an argument that, people use for being unhappy and staying unhappy, and staying, with a single employer a lot of times, is they make kind of the sunk cost argument. And the sunk cost argument is actually a fairly interesting one. But what it is, you know, one of the reasons that I stayed with my bad relationship and then marriage for as long as I did was because, you know, I believed that because the two of us had a long history together, I needed to honor this, and I needed to, you know, understand that maybe there was some learning and we would, you know, come closer over after these problems. And we certainly had a lot of good times and had many memories, and these were a shared bond, and there were tons of memories like this, and sharing all those memories and life together is meaningful. You know, and in the employment realm, there's also something called political capital. So a lot of times when people will come to me and say they want to move, they may have been at their firm like 14 or 15 years, and they may be doing very well. And they may just say, oh, you know, I'm thinking about doing something different. I'd like to try something different. And the thing is the longer you've worked somewhere, a lot of times, the more people you've helped, you know, in your job, the more positive relationships you have. A lot of times it's not like necessarily the right thing to leave. I mean, you know, you have all these relationships and people that are protecting you. And I remember I was talking to a woman that was an associate, and she was, or maybe she was counsel, but she'd been out of school for, you know, I don't know, 18 years or 20 years, and you know, she was actually friends with the founder of the firm, and this is a big firm. I mean, it's you know, I mean, I don't know, one of the top 200 or 300 largest law firms in the country. And so she's never going to lose her job, but she wanted to find a new job. And but she's friends with the, you know, the founder of the firm, and she gets great work, and she works with him in all his cases. And but she's just not, you know, hasn't like turned it up enough to become a partner, and probably never will, but wants to leave. And I said, you know, you have all this political capital. There's no reason, you know, to leave. And so that's a good point for the, you know, sunk cost argument. And I counseled her against leaving, and she's still there, but kind of looking for a job. And, you know, probably not the best idea, but she's looking for a job. So a lot of times people, you know, will, who've been at the same firm, you know, don't, you know, want to move. And there's always a risk of leaving, you know, if you have very strong relationships, and you probably shouldn't, but you may want to. But if there's people that are protecting you, you know, that means you typically have, you know, a lot of political capital, and there's this sunk cost. I mean, you've spent all this time developing these relationships and all this time, you know, learning about someone, and that person's there for you, or the company's there for you. And it's not necessarily a good thing. And I've noticed very, very often when, you know, attorneys will think to themselves, okay, I'm not tolerating being at this firm anymore. You know, I've been there a long time. I need to leave. You know, and they've done all these things in their history that protect them. And then they go to a new firm and then lose that political capital. And then a lot of times that, you know, their time at the new firm is very short. I mean, sometimes it's like you know, like a year, it might be 6 months, and then they'll try to come back, and that won't always work. And it's just, you know, like a bad thing. So you need to be careful. And, you know, but many people stay in bad situations because they have inertia and think they can't leave. And they think that in relationships, you know, and that keeps them stuck. And in reality, you know, the point is, and a good reason to leave is if, you know, you're stuck and you're not treated well, and you're unhappy, and you're not going anywhere, and something is holding you back, then you probably should leave. And this is very important advice right now, because you know, it applies to your relationships, but it also applies to your job. And if you're in a position where you're unhappy and you don't feel valued, and you don't see that changing, and you feel marginalized, and you don't feel like you're worth, and your past is being held against you, and people are not nice to you, and you feel that you're not going to advance, and you probably should leave. And if you're in a relationship where the same thing's going on and you don't see it changing, then you probably should leave. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make in their lives and in their careers is putting themselves in a situation where they're unhappy and staying there when they shouldn't. And you need to think seriously about this. And it's one of the most important decisions that anyone can make. You know, one of the things I've heard about a lot of times, you know, I mean, I've heard, you know, I'm at an age where a lot of women middle-aged women start getting, a lot of them get divorced. And one of the things that I heard someone say is there was some statistic about 80% of the women they get divorced when they're in their, late middle age or middle age, or, late middle age, meaning late 30s, early 40s. Resent it. I mean, not resent it, but yeah, resent. I mean, are unhappy with the decision that they make to break free or something like that. But not always, So, but a lot of times people will stay in bad situations and put themselves in a very bad situation and stay there because of the sunk cost argument. And it's something I think that really holds people back in their careers and lives. And, and you're either moving towards an employer, meaning you're trying to do better and better and better, or you're either moving towards a relationship, meaning you're trying to do better and better and better in that relationship, or you're moving away, meaning you're looking for another opportunity or you want something else. And so which are you? Are you someone who's trying to stay where you're at, or are you someone who's trying to move? And you need to think about what direction you're going, because if you're going in the direction away from something, and you think you've been doing that for a long time, then that really shows you where your heart is, and you can't, it's not worth staying there, and there's a reason for that. And maybe the reason's you, but you need to think about that. Okay, so one of the reasons people stay in bad relationships and they stay in bad employers that aren't good for them is they don't realize their worth or marketability, and they stay in a bad situation due to this, and where they're unhappy. It's very common. Many attorneys, for example, don't realize their worth or marketability. I was talking to a attorney not too long ago, and she had this huge book of business. I mean, it was, not huge, but, fairly large, maybe $3.5 million. And the firm she was at was paying her $200,000 a year. And she didn't think there was anything too unusual about that. And, but was a little bit, unhappy with some other things that were going on at her firm. So she was talking to me. And I told her that with that much business, she could be making easily $800,000 a year. And she had no idea. She just figured that she was getting paid what she was for her, class year. And that was that. And didn't realize how marketable she was. And then found out, after I talked to her that, other people with her type of business were making that much money at her firm, but her firm wasn't paying her that amount. So, a job search, you are marketable and maybe unhappy where you are, but you may be capable of making much more money and having a much better career than you are right now, and not realize it. And and you're going to be marketable in different ways at different points in your career. If you have a lot of stability on your resume, you're going to be capable in most cases, depending on how much experience you have, of getting to a much better employer than you were when you came out of law school. And and you may be in the market may be very good at a certain time for your practice area. Things just go through cycles. It's sometimes, in the middle of a pandemic, trust and estates is an extremely marketable practice area. Normally, no, it's not a marketable practice area. When there's a lot of immigration stuff going on, immigration can be a marketable practice area. Normally, not a great practice area. When the economy is doing very well, corporate can be a very good practice area, but not necessarily when the economy is not doing well, a good practice area. So, things just happen at different times. And so you don't always realize, your marketability. But the thing is everybody I speak to is marketable. To somewhere and to someone. Everyone needs someone like you. And there's people in different geographic markets that don't have access to attorneys. And that it's very hard for them to find them, and it's hard. So the point is you don't necessarily always need to settle. You don't need to settle for a specific job. You don't need to settle for a specific geographic market, and you don't need to tolerate, being treated in a certain way many times, or marginalized if you feel like if you are being, because the odds are you're probably going to be very marketable somewhere. And both my ex-wife and I were certainly marketable. neither of us had any issues meeting new people. There was no reason for two people that were butting heads to stay together, and make each other unhappy in a relationship that was kind of like, ultimately ended up being like, not good. So, part of me might have stayed because it was easier, and I certainly wasn't out there looking for something new, and like my market, didn't understand my marketability, and maybe I even believed I deserved that kind of treatment. Who knows? But the point is, people get in bad relationships all the time, and in bad employment situations, and they stay in those because they don't believe they can do any better. And if an employer or person is treating you badly, you probably can do much better than you're doing right now. As a matter of fact, I'm certain you can. So. But a lot of times what people will do, and this is what employers will do, and this is what people will do in relationships, is that, there's all sorts of forms of, I don't know if I would call it psychological abuse, but people will tell you that there's certain things wrong with them. They'll make you feel lucky to be employed by them, or lucky to have the other person. They may, criticize you or marginalize you, or make you feel like you can't do any better. And, over time, this sort of treatment, it makes people question, puts them kind of, in a state of mind where they're not happy. And they may believe that they can, cannot do any better. And really you have your self-esteem, push the limit. And that's one of the reasons that I'm constantly pushing people that I talk to do better and better and better, to constantly improve yourself. Because if you're constantly improving yourself, then whatever people say about you shouldn't be affecting you in a negative way. You should constantly be rising above it. But it's not always true, but most attorneys, if you're in a bad situation, you can get a better job. You can get a job, may not be in your geographic area, but the odds are always good, that if you look at enough employers in enough geographic regions, and you do an aggressive enough search and outreach, you're going to be able to get something much better. A lot of times people aren't ready for the kind of rejection that comes with doing big searches. But at the same time, you shouldn't care. I mean, anybody that achieves anything, whether it's, someone in Hollywood or whatever, I mean, deals with a lot of rejection. You typically need to knock on a lot of doors, to find people, that are going to like you. And it's just the way it is. I mean, people have to have a need. They have to have an availability. The economy has to be in the right stage at the time. They have to have the money to pay you. There's all sorts of things that affect whether or not you get hired. One of the things I thought was very funny that taught me this lesson, and it's kind of a unusual lesson, but when I was younger, like in my early 20s, I was in Turkey, and I made friends with and actually no, it was on my honeymoon trip that I had planned when my marriage that I'd scheduled with my first wife was canceled. So I just took the honeymoon alone. But anyway, I was in Turkey, and I made friends with a cook who was Greek. And it was very funny. I met someone that I was spending time with, and, and he told us that he wanted to have a date that night or something. And so I watched him. I was just sitting there like in this cafe, and he walked up to at least 4 or 5 tourists, and it probably was in the space of less than an hour, and just spoke to them and chatted with them, and then asked one out, and then ended up having a kind of a long-term relationship with her. And he wasn't afraid to meet people, which I thought was kind of cool. He was just very easily wasn't afraid of rejection, and he knew that whatever his situation was, he could meet new people. And I was impressed with this, and it works that way with jobs. I mean, if you're willing to knock on a lot of doors and get out there, you're going to get a lot of rejection, but people are going to say yes, and something could work out. So a lot of times people, will stay put when something doesn't work for them, and many people live their work lives and personal lives when they're being controlled by others, and they get into situations where they feel comfortable. They allow others to control how they think and what is acceptable to them emotionally and financially, and they essentially give their power to others. I mean, there's there's a need in many people to be taken care of by other people. So they want others to look out for them and take care of them. It may come from a need for parenting and love you didn't get when you were younger, or it may be because you want to take control of your life and career. I don't know, but you don't want to take control of your life and career, but people do that. I mean, and people may not want to assume responsibility for the condition of their lives and jobs, because it's much easier for them to give responsibility to others. However, it's really never easy to give others responsibility, because when you give others responsibility for what happens to you in your life, you typically achieve and get far less than you would otherwise. So in my case, I gave my power away, and it was depressing, and and I should have moved on, and and I wanted it to work, but it wouldn't. And people do this with their careers. I mean, I've seen people literally spend years, years and years, or a decade or more, complaining about their jobs, the people they work with, and what happens to them, but they never really take their power back. They want to believe things will get better, that their employer will look out for the best interests, so they try to stay in situations that don't work, and that's just not what you should do. I mean, you need to get out quickly, and you need to take back your power and fix it if things aren't working. You can either set limits, and what you expect, or you can leave. If you find yourself in a position where you're unhappy and you're not treated well, you can take back your power, and you can always get another position if you really want to, and you need to look out for yourself. And the thing to realize is most employers are typically prioritizing their self-interest over your own, and you can do that as well. I mean, it's important. So taking back your power, accepting responsibility, for the condition of your employment and relationships. If you're not getting good results, there's something you may be doing wrong you can fix. And if you're not getting good results in your job, there may be something off in terms of, how you're doing your job. And, and this may be the case if your employment is up to par. Okay, so, I would say, let me just see here real quick. One of the things I just want to, conclude real quick. I know of a lot of people that, have spent decades in unhappy legal careers, and they believe, that after each move, something's going to change for the better. And one of the things is, most legal jobs are essentially quite similar. You're sitting behind a desk, you're doing work, you're analyzing what are, facts and coming to conclusions and that sort of thing. And it's like that with relationships. Most relationships are quite simple. They're quite similar. The same things, the same issues that you have with people are going to be the same on many times in different relationships. And, the reason we leave jobs and often stay in situations that don't work for us are going to have, analogies like I showed you to romantic lives. We're governed by many conscious and unconscious assumptions, and these determine, how we process the people we find ourselves with, and understanding yourself and your motivations are going to really, have a way, to affect your success and so forth. Here, so the first question is, who is your customer, the employer or candidate for employment? Well, I assume that is in the type of work that I do. I would say that the customer is both. It depends on what is the situation, but I think recruiters are, and I'm a recruiter, legal placement are typically middleman, and so both of them are the customer. Okay, let's see. From your perspective, how much information should a candidate attorney give you about the details of experience in legal work done for former clients, including private law firm clients and in-house employer clients? In other words, what do you need to know versus what details of the attorney's experience should typically remain confidential as part of information gained during the attorney-client privilege. As someone in my position, I don't really need to know, everything about the type of work someone did. I mean, just generally in terms of the practice area, most attorneys, corporate attorneys will have transaction sheets. Others, litigation attorneys will have, a list of, different types of things they've worked on. In many cases, I would say that, let me keep these names confidential, I apologize. But in many cases, I would say that, most litigation work, if you file briefs and so forth with the court, that's public, so you can always, provide that, but you don't need to have a lot of, necessarily that much information in terms of you give to a recruiter or an employer. They don't need to know, in many cases, the name of the employer, the people, and they certainly don't need to know any confidential information. Okay, let me just see here. Okay, this one, okay, let me see. I struggle to bring this up, but I found I am the least happy when working in a law firm. I would like to find a better job, either in-house or NGO. How do I work with the legal recruiter to find those opportunities? Okay, well, yeah, and that's fine. I mean, if you are unhappy with the law firm, and a lot of people are, there's nothing wrong with working in a law firm. It's certainly, and it is an environment that a lot of people are unhappy. If you do want to work in-house or with an NGO, in most cases, those types of jobs are not filled by recruiters. So you can find them on Law Crossing. You can find them, which finds every job. You can find them on, other sites like Indeed. You can, Law Crossing also has a service called Law Crossing Concierge, which can apply to them for you. Typically, if you do want another position, a recruiter isn't going to be that great for finding in-house jobs. They will have them, but recruiters typically fill a very, very small percentage of in-house jobs. I would say probably less than 1%. So, you're going to be much better off finding those on your own typically. And a lot of times, just searching online is a good way to find them. But that's what I would recommend. Okay, any questions anyone has, I'm happy to answer them, really about anything to do with your career. I'm happy, because I realize this isn't necessarily all about, today was a kind of a, real general. Let's see. How long does it take for new employees to be around in the company? 2, 3 to 4 years to become comfortable with the employer, nearly at par with a firm for the last 14 or 15 years. It doesn't take, that long all the time. The lack of trust typically is going to come when, they've seen you leave your last employers, very frequently. And so there'll be less trust. But I would say, after a couple of years at an employer, then they'll start kind of, even after a little more than a year, they'll start trusting you more. A lot of times when you're away places, and then, if you're away like on a case and you're working, someplace for an extended period of time, that can be helpful. But, after a couple of years, they're going to start, trusting you. But you typically also need to go through a couple different crises. And so, most law firms and most companies and legal employers have different crisis things that happen to them at different points in time. And so, if you've been through a couple of those and you've managed to emerge unscathed and without taking sides the wrong way and that sort of thing, and then you're going to be more trusted. Okay, let's see. I have been working in-house for 20 plus years. Each position has been as a generalist. For example, contracts, real estate, corporate employment law generalist. Does this show I'm not committed? Absolutely not. Being with one single employer is more important. And in-house jobs typically will be doing a lot of different things. My focus is always on talking about law firm jobs, but as an in-house candidate, I think you're great. I mean, especially having been at the same employer for a long time. So I think that is very good. That you've been able to do that. And if I had an in-house company, I would think you'd be a great person. If I had an in-house job, I think you'd be a great person to hire. So no, there's nothing wrong with having been at the same employer for 20 years doing a bunch of different things. And as a matter of fact, I mean, that's most common for people working in-house, is to do a lot of different things. Okay, is it better to stay in a job I don't enjoy while looking for a new one, or leave so I have more time and energy to focus on finding a better job? That is a very good question. You should stay in a job you don't enjoy while looking for a new one. You should never try to switch jobs. In order to, you should never leave a job in order to find a new job. It's much easier by a factor of probably, several, times. I don't know if the number is 5 or 10, but, when you're currently employed in a job, law firms and companies and so forth believe that, you're doing something right, that you're committed, that, you're not losing your job and that things are going well, and are much more likely to keep you around or hire you, than if you're unemployed. So no, you should never quit a job to look for a job. As a matter of fact, if you do get fired from a job because they're doing layoffs or whatever, you should always negotiate to try to stay on their website, to have access to your voicemail and email as long as you possibly can, so employers still think you're working there. Because the second you're unemployed, people will assume that there's a reason for that and you may have done something wrong, and it becomes much harder to find a new job when you're unemployed than when you're employed. People want to hire people that are currently employed because you have a lot more value. You don't seem like you're as desperate. There's the idea that you probably didn't lose you're not losing your job. And if you're unemployed, people believe that you may have lost your job because you did something wrong. Okay, so let's see. I've been in my job for less than a year, and I realized it's not my ideal practice scenario. Is it okay to look for a new job now, or should I wait until I have a longer history with this employer? I don't want it to look like I'm job hopping or unlikely to stay at my new employer, but I also don't want to waste time in a setting where I'm unhappy. Okay, well, that's a good question. I don't know what type of practice setting you're in, whether or not you're in a law firm or you're in a company, or what you're doing. But if you've been there for less than a year, I really, unless it's intolerable, I would recommend staying. If you believe that you can get into a much better employer right now, then I would recommend potentially leaving. If you can see yourself committing to the other employer, you don't want to look like you're job hopping. And if you are getting very good experience in your practice area and training, then it makes sense to try to stay there probably as long as you possibly can. Law firms are the way people learn how to be attorneys is, typically the best training comes from law firms. And, in most practice areas and settings, it takes, 3 to 5 years to really kind of know what you're doing and to get the right training. So I always recommend staying kind of as long as you possibly can. And the longer you stay, if you can stay 4 or 5 years, the better. But if you don't, if the setting makes you unhappy, meaning if you are in-house and you want to go to a law firm, or you're in a law firm and you feel like you could be in a different setting, then, you should think about it. The other thing I would say too, that's very important is, the culture and atmosphere of the people, the place you're working in is always something to consider. So what'll happen is, you may be working with a group of people that you just don't like, or that are not like you, or where you feel, not part of the group. And so you may be better off being in with another group of people. And, if you can get into another group of people where you're happier, then that's the right thing for you to do. So a lot of times what makes you unhappy is the culture of the place or the type of work you're doing, and not necessarily the practice setting. I know that, the first law firm that I worked in, I loved the people and I loved the practice, the kind of group of people I was with, and I felt, they were nice people. And the next one I worked in, I didn't like them. So, and I was unhappy, and I ended up leaving the practice of law. So it just depends, the type of group you're with. Okay, let's see here. You mentioned it is best not to dabble in all areas of law. I've started my own practice, but I'm interested in multiple areas of law. What do you recommend? I'm thinking of focusing on business law and trademarks, but during this time, I also want to have clients with estate planning. Would this be acceptable? So if you're starting your own practice, it's important to think about, what is going to be like the most sustainable, and what is going to give you a long-term business. And, you know, trust, wills, and estate planning can definitely give you a long-term business. That is you know, a good thing to do. You know, you can certainly have a long-term business doing trust and estates. You can also do it with, you know, trademark. But trademark law is a very cyclical practice area. So what happens with trademarks is it gets very busy when the economy is booming and people are starting new businesses, and then it slows down. Also, there's not a ton of ongoing work in law and trademarks, and there tends to be a lot of ongoing work in trust and estate planning. And then also you kind of build up a bunch of clients in estate plan, and then when they die, you get to manage the estate, and you typically get a percentage of that for doing that. So trust and estates can be a very good long-term practice area. So I would think about that to some extent, you know, if you're choosing. But yes, you could do both, but I certainly would recommend if you're starting a, you know, your own practice that, you know, you're going to be better off focusing on one thing. What I like about trademark, though, if you're going to be doing multiple things, is it's not as difficult to learn. Business law, though, if you want to do business law and trust and estates planning, the problem is when you start talking to clients, you know, if you don't have an expertise in something, then they're going to be turned off. And the more you learn about trust and estates, I mean, you can do trust and estates and, you know, I've seen people do it into their 90s and be very good at it. So, you know, you're better off focusing on something the longer you know, as much as you possibly can. You know, business law is related to trust and estates, and you can help businesses and so forth, or people that own businesses, but I would be careful. You know, the more you hold yourself out as an expert, the more clients are going to be attracted to you. Okay. I am, and again, as many questions as you have, they don't have to be about, you know, anything I spoke about today. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm looking for an IP attorney or patent agent job. I'm an electrical engineer with not a lot of experience and a new lawyer. I worked at a civil litigation firm. I only have 2 months of an internship in IP law in China. What can I do to experience or improve upon my IP attorney resume? Well, electrical engineers typically can do fairly well, you know, but they, you know, you'd have to have like a US law degree. You know, the market right now is not that great for electrical engineers. So doing patent related work in major markets at least. But you know, I would certainly, you know, if you are looking for a job, you know, I would recommend, you know, trying to get anything you can in law firms. You know, typically, you know, you may want to work in large cities, but in smaller markets, it's going to be easier to find a job. And there are lots of very small patent law firms all over. You know, as a matter of fact, I mean, even Microsoft and Amazon a lot of times will use, you know, small law firms that do, you know, 3 or 4 guys that, you know, maybe even work remotely, or girls, but, you know, people that work remotely doing patent law. So, I mean, you can always find a patent job if you look hard enough, and especially with an electrical engineering degree, you know, but you definitely need to, I don't know if you've taken the patent bar, but you definitely need to take the patent bar and pass that. Okay, so this is going to be the last question, unless anyone has any more, and then I will, anything you have, I'm happy to answer. If you had a job offer withdrawn due to the pandemic, how would you approach a search as a law grad from a second-tier law school, above average, but not top 10 GPA, in a way that makes you marketable? Well, I mean, if you went to a second-tier law school and you had a job offer, I mean, you obviously are a good candidate. You know, it's certainly, you know, the majority of people coming out of law school did not have offers, you know, when they were in school. It's a very bad situation, you know, right now. And one thing I would say, and you know, if anybody wants to ask any questions about their particular search, I'm more than happy to answer them. But it's a bad situation. I mean, I'm noticing lots of very, very highly qualified people, including, you know, graduates of Ivy League law schools that are clerking in circuit courts and so forth, that have had offers withdrawn. And there's a lot of people that have had offers withdrawn that are flooding into the market right now because of this pandemic. And so it's a bad market, you know, to be, you know, a new graduate. It's a bad time to be coming out of a clerkship without a job. It's just overall, it's not a good time. And So a second year law school though is good. I mean, it's not, you know, I mean, but again, it doesn't really matter, you know, what you did. I mean, where you went to law school. But so there's a couple different things that I would recommend doing. You know, and thanks for asking more questions. I see some more questions coming in, so that's helpful. And anything you guys want to know, I'm happy to answer. You can ask them anonymously. But one of the things that's very important is, you know, how and where you market yourself. So, you know, you're better off generally getting a job in your home market where you're from. You know, it's usually easier to get a job in your home market. Large markets right now, because of this pandemic, meaning, you know, places like San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, you know, Houston, Miami, you know, Chicago is very slow. Any large market is going to be very, very difficult to get a job in, because large markets have lots and lots of attorneys and they lay people off. And so all those people are looking for jobs at the same time. And also, like, young people like to go, that are coming out of law school, like to go to, they love going to large markets. They all want to go to New York or Los Angeles. And that's just not where the opportunities are right now. And it's going to be very difficult to get jobs there. Now, I'm not saying it can't be done. Of course it can. But you definitely want to try to look at, you know, smaller markets, markets where you're from, markets where you have some sort of connection. So typically university towns are good. So if you know, wherever you went to school could be a good market to apply to, because there's employment built into those markets. The other thing you can do is you can, you know, also, you need to apply to a lot more places. So you need to apply to, you know, small firms, large firms. I would try to work in a law firm first and get experience instead of working in another practice setting, because it'll be very hard to get into a law firm later. But you just need to try to work in a lot of different places, and you will be able to get a job, but you need to be prepared for lots and lots of rejection. And your job search should be, you know, first. You should put your job search first. You should do everything you can and apply to as many places as you can to get a job. And you should also apply to places that don't have openings. So, you know, if you're from, say, you know, a town of, like, I don't know where you're from, but, you know, wherever you're from, you should try to blanket the market and pretty much apply to every firm there. And even indicate, just a willingness to work and get the best offer you can, because you will be able to get a job and there is work. The other thing you can do too is the work right now, like I said earlier, there's a lot of work in trust and estates, litigation, there's a lot of work, but corporate and so forth tends to slow down during this type of thing. And you should also not be trying to get jobs in practice areas where you may not have a background for it. So an example would be, you know, if you want to do IP and you don't have a science background, you shouldn't try to do that. So I hope that helps. Any more questions? I'm happy to answer as well. Okay, I want to practice an area of law that my current firm does not have as robust of a practice area as others. Since I'm on a non-partnership track, it's not always easy to get experience there. How can I bolster my experience if it takes experience to lateral out? Okay. Okay. Well, I'm not sure, you know, what practice area that is, but you know, but the idea is if you want to, it doesn't matter like how many people are in that practice area at your firm. If you can do it, that's great. And if you can get as much experience as possible, that's great. You know, anytime you can be like in a practice area that is, you know, very, you know, like a very difficult practice area to kind of get into. So an example of a practice area that's easy to get into is like litigation, because everyone kind of learns how to be a litigator in, you know, in law school, for example. But and then when you get out, there's a lot more litigators. But any type of, you know, transactional practice area that could be like real estate or corporate, or, you know, something that's a little bit, or insurance coverage is not that, but it's a different type of, you know, practice area. Anytime you can get into something like that, you know, would be very, very helpful. And, you know, but, you know, so that's the better way to kind of get experience, to bolster your experience. If you are in a non-partnership track at your firm, and that's perfectly fine. A lot of large law firms have non-partnership tracks, and you're still getting the same experience and exposed to the same types of things. And it's also, if you do very good work too at a non-partnership track job, you can always, you know, kind of get on a partnership track later. and that does happen at most, firms. And so I would also think about that. But, I don't know, if your firm isn't giving you that practice area experience, then you might be better off leaving to find a firm where you can get it. Okay, so next question. Your ex-employee who worked for 18 years would ask you for a critical evaluation of your job. What difference it made to you in terms of impression of the employee when you reviewed her work at the end of each quarter? Well, it was every 6 months, but I think the reason she wanted a critical evaluation was, she was doing such a good job, and I wasn't. I was very, complimentary of her job most of the time, and honestly, that was probably not the right thing to do. I think people do need to get a lot of feedback, in their jobs, and I think that the more feedback you give people, the better. And with her, I would always kind of, tell her a few things that she could do to be better. But, I think that, it didn't make a big difference in terms of my impression of her. But I think what was important for her, was that she was internally motivated and constantly wanted to improve. And so, because she was internally motivated and so, driven to improve, she did improve. And the position working for me was, as a placement, was kind of a, as a lot of it involves commission. And so she was able to, find her weaknesses and constantly address them and kind of be driven by that, which I thought was kind of cool. And not a lot of people do that. I mean, a lot of people are, don't want criticism, they want praise, especially young people. And, and even older people, though, sometimes I don't like criticism. So I thought that was a good thing. And any more questions people have, the better, because I'm happy to answer any questions. Okay, when do you think the market will open back up? Q3 or Q4? Is it worth applying now or wait till it opens? Yes, you should be applying every place you can right now, and then you should apply again. And I don't think employers, really know when it's going to open back up. I mean, there's still a lot of interviewing and hiring going on. I mean, all of our, we're getting multiple interviews each day and placements, pretty much every day. Not every day last week, but I think no, actually, we did make a placement every day last week. So we're getting people jobs every day, and but at the same time, the market is not, going haywire, and it's mainly, most of the activity is in smaller markets and smaller cities. So that's where you should be looking, and you should be applying now. And I don't know when it's going to open up. I mean, one of the things is I was actually getting ready to go on vacation next week, and I was kind of excited about, or next Saturday, I was leaving for vacation, and then I just found out that where I was going, maybe closed down, and maybe closing down all the beaches and so forth in this place on the East Coast. And so, so I'm certainly not excited about that, and I'm lost out going on my vacation. So I don't know. I mean, there could be a second wave of everything that's happening, but you should do whatever you can to apply now. You should never hold back. You should be getting yourself out there, and people are getting lots and lots of interviews. I mean, it's just happening. And people are getting job offers, and there's still legal work going on, but it's only there if you're, looking for it, and you need to, really get out there and apply to as many possible places as you can. And especially if you're not employed right now, then I would recommend doing that. So no, you should never wait. You should always get out there. And your question is, when do I think the market will open back up? I think it'll probably, realistically, like, things will start getting very busy, more likely than not, after the election in November. I think that things will start getting reserved until then. That's my opinion. Okay. I have a Swiss cheese resume, but normally I'm loyal and committed. If I have not practiced full-time for a number of years due to a now resolved health issue, but want to go back to full-time practice, how do I best show working on being committed? Okay, well, there's a lot of ways to deal with that, if you haven't practiced several years due to a health issue and you want to go back full time, you can always find a position. just keep in mind that, there's always people that can make money off the work that you're doing, and you just need to be able to find them. If you had a health issue, typically, and I don't know how serious it was or what is exactly, but starting an employer and just giving it kind of your all is the best thing to do. A lot of times, and it's very acceptable, for example, for women to leave and have kids and spend several years away from the job and then come back, and employers don't have a problem with that. I've seen lots of men, deal with all sorts of issues. And in one case, a guy that I represented went into, spent 6 months recovering from drinking. I guess he was drinking too much alcohol, and was very upfront with firms about that. And he'd had a very good career up until that point, and he was able to get job offers. So it just depends, on how you position yourself. And this particular guy did position himself as someone that was in a rehab for 6 months, and it worked. I mean, to my astonishment. And so I think it's okay. And I think a lot of times, one of the things that's interesting is, I was talking today with someone about doing this presentation. I was like, this is, talking about these horrible failed relationships is insane. Like, I can't believe I'm going to do this like publicly. And the person said, well, this is, it's good to be vulnerable, so there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable. And it's true. I mean, we like people that are, vulnerable. And so, talking about your health problems and that those held you back and those are done is probably okay. And I don't see anything wrong with it. But you need to commit at your next job. We have 2 more questions. So if anybody wants any more questions asked, just ask them now, before it ends, and then I'll finish up here. Given the pandemic and that partners and some firms are all remote, is it still recommended to engage in physical mass targeted mailing of resumes? That's a good question. Is everyone opening mail and so forth? That's a great question. I recommend it because I do believe that, most people do get mail, but I think that's a great question. And I hadn't even, we still mass mail, not mass mail, but all of our candidates, we still, even though this is going on, we still send out letters with, physical letters in addition to different things with for our candidates. But I do think it's recommended. I realize that a lot of people are remote, but people are still seeing their mail and having it delivered to them and so forth. So I think it's okay. And I think that certain people are still coming into work. So I don't think it's a problem, but that's a great point. I mean, to be honest with you, I hadn't, I think it occurred to me at some point. And we spend, tens of thousands of dollars mailing out letters a month. So it's probably, I'm thinking about what you said, and it's actually a good question. But yes, I do agree with doing it just because no one does it. So anything you can do to get attention where other people aren't doing the same thing is important, especially with smaller law firms who don't get that kind of attention. Okay, last question, unless anybody has any more. And, and if you do, just ask them real quickly. Okay, so Denver, a big market that's low, or a smaller market that's good to apply to right now? Denver is an extremely popular market, and it's a hard market to get a job in. It's one of the most competitive markets there is. People from all over the country, from New York and Los Angeles and all these different places want to move to Denver. And Denver has a lot of very good attorneys trying to work there. And actually it's a great market. So Denver, it's a great question. I would consider Denver to be a large market, and one that is a very competitive market. You can get jobs there, but it's actually there's some amazing, very highly qualified attorneys there. And it's a good market. Okay, new question. Is Atlanta becoming a new IP or technology hub? That's a good question. There are a lot of more IP related jobs in Atlanta than there were in the past. But it's not, I would say that Atlanta isn't necessarily a new IP or technology hub. I mean, most of the IP and technology positions are historically have been in Silicon Valley. For biotech, it's traditionally been in Northern Virginia, but to a greater extent in Boston and in the San Diego area. And then, in Boston actually is probably the best, and then the other question I think that, or the other, issue that you asked about Atlanta. Atlanta is, there are some patent prosecution jobs and there's some other type of IP jobs there, but it's not really that growing. Even New York, is doing, fairly well compared to the way it was a couple of years ago in IP or technology. But no, I don't think Atlanta, I wouldn't consider an IP or technology hub. Okay. How do you get a tech law job without any tech law experience? Well, there's lots of tech law type jobs. There's positions doing agreements. There's like tech agreements. There's tech litigation type stuff. There's a lot of smaller firms that do tech type work. And so you can definitely get a job doing that. For tech work, it doesn't require any special type of background, meaning, if you're doing patent prosecution, you typically need like a science or math background, but tech work definitely does not always require that. So you can, certainly get, lots of tech law experience, a job doing that. One thing I would caution you on though is, tech law tends to do well when there's a lot of business activity starting up. So meaning new companies are starting, and then that's kind of throwing off work to law firms and so forth. And so that, is a type of, work that may be slowing down now. Another thing that's a little bit difficult about tech law is technology related positions also tend to, not all the time, but a lot of times, they tend to be kind of smaller projects and not large projects. So a lot of times that work, you're not going to find a lot of it in large law firms, and it sometimes can be, and even in mid-sized law firms, can be difficult to get that type of work. But the best way to find it is just keep applying to jobs. The other way a lot of times people get tech law experience or want to do that type of work is you get work from people in your firm that do it already, and then you just kind of get one-off projects from them and then try to get involved in it that way. And that's what I did. I was interested in that a long time ago. I mean, 20 plus years ago, and that was the way I was able to get that experience. Okay, if you are doing contract work in an area different than your practice area because you're about to be laid off, should you include, or because you were laid off, should you include that in your resume, or does it show lack of focus? I typically don't like putting contract work on a resume. I think it's better, unless it's been going on for a couple of years or a long period of time, people have questions. It's better to just kind of look like, you are employable, or, and you're not doing contract work. I realize everyone needs to make a living, but sometimes people think you're doing contract work because, you want the flexibility, and then that shows the lack of focus or the lack of commitment. And so, I typically recommend not including contract work on your resume if you can avoid it. And it depends, but, I would just try to keep my existing practice area on there. There's nothing wrong with looking for a job when you don't have a job, but it's definitely easier to get one when you have a job. So it can show lack of focus. And again, any more questions? This is the last question someone asked, so I'll ask any more that people have too. Okay, can you give me some examples of smaller markets that might be easier to get a job in right now? Just some examples of cities that you might think might be a better market right now. Okay, well, some examples of cities that are going to be better markets right now would be university towns. So any type of university town is always a good market to apply to during recession. That's because universities are always generating, they always generate revenue. And people are always, taking out loans to go there, and they throw a lot of work off in their environments. So university towns are good. Other markets that are always going to be good are typically markets where there's state capitals. Those are, always tend to be good markets, or capital type cities, unless it's like a major market. So an example of capital type city might be like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That would be where I would look for a job if I was in Pennsylvania before I look for a job in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. So smaller markets like that are better. Some markets that are doing extremely well right now, like for litigation, for example, Ohio's doing well. There's a lot of opportunity in Ohio. I don't understand it, but I'm just telling you that there's stuff there. Another market that's doing extremely well right now, I don't understand it, is Las Vegas. That's doing very well. Markets like Sacramento, which is the capital of California, are doing well. Other markets, any type of small market where there's not a lot of people looking for the same jobs. The reason large markets are difficult is because there's all these people that have lost jobs that are looking for jobs. Smaller markets tend to be, a lot less desirable. In California, anytime you get outside of a major city, so you go to a place like Riverside, it's going to be a better market probably than Los Angeles. So you need to, do what you can to look at, different markets and smaller cities, and it's a great question. I mean, I'm even seeing like a lot of activity in places like Nebraska, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the Midwest, and any type of market that you normally wouldn't think of that's top of mind, you can do very well. But you do need to apply to places in smaller markets. And the best market, by the way, is going to be a market where you have some sort of contacts, where you have some sort of family, where something's going on that can make it seem like you'll go there and you'll stay. So that's one thing I would recommend if you can. I have a couple more questions. If anyone has another question, please ask it right now. Okay, I have a GPA of 3.24. Should I keep it on my resume? Hoping to get a job at a bigger mid-sized firm. Should I keep it on my resume or leave it off? I typically only recommend, leaving your grade point on your resume if it's really good. So, it depends. It doesn't even depend on the law school. So, like if you're in the top, 15% of a law school or 20%, you can leave it on. The better you did, the better. Law firms, most employers want to hire the best people they can hire. So if at 3.25, I mean, when I went to law school, I went to, University of Virginia, and I graduated, in a long time ago. But when I went there, the average grade point average, 80% of the class was between a 2.9 and a 3.1. So a 3.24 would probably put you in the top 10%. I mean, if that was the case, then you should put that on there. And different law schools have different, types of curves, but a lot of them have these loony curves, where, most people have an A- grade point average. So, I don't know. I mean, but if that's a really high grade point average, I would leave it on. Typically, unless you did really well, I don't recommend leaving it on. And a lot of times big law firms won't even ask. I mean, I would just leave it off unless it's really good. Okay, is Axiom a law firm or a staffing company? I can't quite tell. I've seen an increase in posting for them. Are they okay? Any good? I mean, I'm not gonna, say anything negative or positive about Axiom because I don't, really have an opinion one way or another. But it is a staffing company, so they will send you out to work a lot of times inside of companies or and do short-term projects. So it is a staffing company. They hire actually very good people. So a lot of times, very good attorneys get hired to work there, and you can get good experience. But in terms of transitioning from Axiom back to a law firm, that is something that could be very difficult. You've probably seen an increase in postings for them because maybe a lot of law firms or companies are using them to save money right now. I don't know, but I do think you can get good experience with Axiom, but I don't know how much that's going to help you if you want to work in another law firm. But certainly, in terms of staffing companies that send people out on projects, that I see very good people taking jobs with them. This is the last question, unless anybody has any more. And I'll answer any more questions people have if there's any more. If you are not barred in the state to which you are applying, what is the best way to convey that you are either can waive in or willing to take the bar exam? Well, most of the employers will know, you know, that you can waive in, but you know, the difficult markets to kind of work in are good. You know, California is very difficult. So if you want to get a job in California, you almost always need to take the bar exam. And not only that, but most employers want to see that you pass. And I was actually thinking about writing an article about the California bar exam, and I wrote it down today just because you know, asking if you should take it, because for the California bar exam, you know, they have very low pass rates. I mean, I don't know what it was the last time for February, but I think it was like 25% or something. And that's probably actually for, you know, for the attorney exam is probably even lower. Like, so you can take 2 different types of exams. So you know, for California, New York, Florida, those are places where a lot of times they want you to take the bar. But the big one is New York and California. So, but if you're not barred, it's typically not that difficult to waive in, and most bar exams aren't that difficult to get in, you know, to take, you know, so, or to waive into. Okay, this is the last question, and then if anybody has any more, I'll continue to answer them, but this is the last one I have right now. Is it worth to take the California attorney exam or just go for the full bar? I recommend taking the full bar exam because the full bar exam is going to be much easier and has a higher pass rate. You know, I know that the bar exam used to be 3 days, now it's 2 days, and I think when you take just the attorney exam, I think it's just essays, and I think when you take the regular exam, you also get to do the multi-state. So I think that taking the multi-state actually makes the pass rate much higher when you take the full exam. The attorney exam, there's just, you know, I think a lot of it's because people don't study as much, but it does have a very low pass rate. Lots of very, very competent attorneys have failed it. And, you know, so I would recommend taking the full one. Okay, well, those are all the questions. Thank you. I will talk to everyone next week. And for you know, everybody with these calls, you know, if you think of any questions during the week, I'm happy to answer any of them that you have on the call, even if it's not related to the presentation. And I hope those answers helped. And oh, I've got, and next question is, what is next week's topic? And I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to try to make next week's topic something to do with job search. I would like to do something about you know how to answer certain questions in interviews. You know, this week's topic I realized was a little bit general, and I you know, in terms of general, it's about committing and you know, picking a practice area and picking an employer and picking. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is I feel that, you know, that's just very important, because I think that a lot of people aren't doing that. And I think that if you do that, you can really, you know, in terms of what I talked about this week, have a much better career and life, you know, but that's really the one constant I've seen of the people that do the best. But I would like to do something about, you know, questions, you know, in interviews and how to answer those. But it may not do that, but I was thinking about that. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And I will talk to you next week. Thanks.